our 2020 attendees. I'm Paige McFeely, CEO and co-founder of BASE, and your moderator for today's session with Casey Pacheco, CEO and co-founder of 33 Vincent. Our panel today will focus on the evolution of the assistant role and how it is expanding into new spaces in 2020 and beyond. Quick backstory, Casey and I co-founded 33 Vincent in 2014, which is a really fun story for another time, but also led to the original idea for BASE. So in 2018, when I stepped away from 33 Vincent to focus on building BASE, Casey stepped in as full CEO of 33 Vincent rather than co-CEO, which we had been doing together for a number of years, and has been doing a tremendous job. So before we jump into our actual conversation today, Casey, can you tell us a little bit about 33 Vincent and what you all have been up to over the last couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. 33 Vincent has been, I like to call it my fourth baby. Paige and I built the organization while also raising 6 collective boys. And so we set out in the beginning to bring high caliber support to small businesses and teams that needed help, but wanted that top tier quality support. So we got into the executive assistant space early on and found a niche in top quality executive assistants, matching talent, flexible talent from home with small businesses, entrepreneurs, and teams that need support, and all on a flexible basis. So we were working remotely before it was a huge cascade of remote work, and we love supporting our clients, building a best-in-class network of VAs, and going the extra mile.
Awesome. Well, you have certainly seen the evolution of, I think in the beginning when we started, people thought we were crazy for working remotely, and now we're all doing it. So can you tell us, for all of our panelists today, a little bit about how you've seen remote work change, not only in the tactics of how you do it, but in how people perceive it, particularly over the last 7 or so months?
Yeah, I'm thrilled. I think silver lining to all that's happening in our world. I'm thrilled about a movement toward acceptance on remote work and flexible work. It's something that we've been passionate about. I've been passionate about since 2014. And in the last 7 months in particular, I would say the evolution of the assistant role, we can talk about that a little bit, but overall, just the general acceptance of and welcoming of a remote assistant has been higher than ever. And I think back to taking calls with prospects who are interested in EA support. And the question that I got on almost every call was, how can an assistant support me remotely? You know, I can't really put that together, how that would work. And we would coach through using tools and technology to really optimize that relationship. And now that question never comes up. And so I think it speaks to the world and the nation's willingness to accept remote work. And there are so many ways I think a remote assistant can be just as valuable or even more valuable in some cases than an in-person assistant. So love seeing the evolution and the evolution of acceptance.
Looking back to 2014, we didn't have nearly as many tools available to us either. This was before Zoom was widely available, and we found some really creative ways to connect with our growing team, like recording funny videos for our team, for different things. But it's just, I find that it's easier than it has ever been to support people in a remote setting, but also to build a team. We've spoken with executives who just don't believe you can build or scale a team in a remote setting. And I'm just so pleased, like you said, silver lining, that this is changing and people are becoming more accepting and realizing, like, hey, we don't always need to all be in the same place to be highly, highly productive. In fact, maybe we can be more productive when we can build up some of those boundaries around our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to the days before we had those more synchronous communication tools and how communicating always had to be even more intentional and finding the right channels to communicate. And now with Slack and Zoom and the many tools that allow for collaboration, I think it's easier than ever to find that space and then leverage that to maximize a relationship. I've seen relationships flourish remotely over the course of 6 years, long-term relationships flourishing in a long-term remote setting. So it's possible. It just takes, I think, a little bit of mindfulness.
You hit the nail on the head perfectly there. And it's something we've thought so much about at Base, as you know, of especially in a remote setting, how important it is to build clear and predictable communication pathways. Certainly if you're an assistant supporting an executive, but really in any remote setting, in any type of role that you're in, because context sharing can be a bit trickier if you're not sitting right next to each other in an office space, and making sure that everybody has access to all of the right information at all times can feel sometimes like another job unless you wrap a whole process around it about how can you make sure that what you're communicating needs to be communicated without adding one more thing to your to-do list. I think that's so important. How have you, knowing that 33 Vincent is a company full of contractors, so how can you encourage the team to do this without saying, hey, this is the way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's work style is so unique. And I think there are some core principles that everyone can live by when it comes to calibrating with your executive or leader around what that communication cadence looks like and what the unique needs are for that leader. Finding a way to build a process around that, to your point. It can look very different from person to person and relationship to relationship. No two executive and assistant relationships look alike. So how can you as an assistant adapt your process to meet the needs of the executive and then continue to recalibrate and adapt from there? And I think what we aim to do at 33 Vincent is say, here are some great tools that you can use and some great best practices and how to use those. But it's ultimately up to you and your relationship to choose what's best. And we've found varying approaches and all of them very successful.
That leads really well to the next topic that I want to talk about, which is really, so you and I in particular, especially when we started 33 Vincent, spent a lot of time talking about the future of work and how work just in general is going to evolve as the proliferation of outsourcing continues to progress, as we are more comfortable with delegation, as technology advances. But more and more, I'm beginning to feel really passionately that the future of work is here. We're in it now. COVID forced that upon us, maybe before we were ready. But also that the future of work, which by future of work, I mean flexibility and working remotely and being able to maximize your output, really lies with the assistant. And as you know, at Base, we believe that not just C-level or VP level employees deserve access to an assistant, but really every knowledge worker. So I'd love to hear from you from your unique vantage point, knowing that you're talking with so many different types of executives, a lot of entrepreneurs, but also big company executives. What's your perspective on how the future of work really lies with the assistant? Is that something you agree with? And how do you see that continuing to evolve?
Yeah, I think, and I agree 100% that the assistant role is one that has come always with so much value. But as we look to, I think this common theme I'm hearing a lot about, like zone of brilliance or zone of genius, and operating within that space that you were really hired for as a leader in an organization, whether you're mid-level management, a knowledge worker, high-level executive, you were hired to do a specific job. And oftentimes there are core parts of that job or parts surrounding your job that take your focus away from that core deliverable or core leverage that you bring to the organization. And so if we can hone in and even supply fractional support to some of these leaders, the impact would trickle throughout the organization. So we've seen in our case, several executives at varying levels of an organization leverage an assistant, and leverage in some cases a shared assistant for that easy knowledge transfer and applicability. I love seeing that supported by organizations, and my hope is that as we see more flexibility, continued work from home, remote learning and other things, that there will be more acceptance for assistants that help elevate any leadership. You know, thinking about a mid-level manager I know who has been booking all of his own travel, a little bit shy now because not traveling as much, but booking all of his own travel, arranging all of his own meetings, and contributing at a really high level in the organization. My first question was, why don't you have an assistant? And he replied that his organization doesn't yet support that. So looking to the future, I think that is, maybe it's the bubble I'm in, but hearing and seeing a lot about doing less with more and, excuse me, not doing less with more, subtracting for addition. So let's remove things from your plate so you can be more effective. And it's not about working 80 hours a week. It's about working really well with the time that you have and being really focused. And so I think that messaging supports more assistance in the workplace. And I've seen the rise of personal assistant apps, executive assistants, agencies that provide fractional support. So I'm thrilled about that and hope that trend continues.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I'm really pleased to see what appears, and maybe I'm in the same bubble as you, but I feel like we're starting to see a shift away from the way that our culture really celebrates hustle and being stressed out, and you have to work almost to the point of an unhealthy level in order to really find success. And it's been an interesting proposition as we go into a technology startup where I'd say that ideology still really persists. And so as we look to hiring people, as we look to raise money, all these things it's a really interesting conversation to have, because I'm beginning to see people's mindset shift a little bit of like, hey, I don't have to kill myself to be successful, to be really good at my job. And I think as we progress towards this future of work that I do think we're already in, I believe, maybe this is overly optimistic, but I believe we're going to start seeing the metric of, did I do a good day's work today? Did I contribute to the best of my ability to move my organization's goals forward? And that can look so different depending on the role that you're in. If you're a CEO, that might look different than if you're that CEO's assistant, but still those goals and objectives should still be the same and moving in the right direction, which is really, really exciting to me.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd love to talk a little bit as we go through these shifts that we're talking so much about. We hear a lot from assistants, and especially with the economy the way that it is. A few assistants that we are in close contact with, their companies did layoffs, and a few of them maybe didn't get laid off, but are now finding themselves supporting way more executives than they have capacities to support. And all of that tied in with how the way we work looks so different. So from your vantage point, knowing that many of the assistants at 33 Vincent are very much in that part-time capacity, how are you seeing them take steps to future-proof their role? And what do you think is the most important, whether you're a remote assistant part-time or you're full-time and you used to be in office, but remote is very new to you? How can you really protect your role so that you're not only safe now, but safe for whatever might come our way, which at this point, who knows?
Yeah. There's some good questions in there. So I think universally, one thing that comes to mind is the value of managing up and continuing to lean into showcasing your value, to not being afraid to state and put data behind your value. And I'll speak to that in a minute. And with that managing up also comes expectation setting and understanding, am I spending my time in alignment with my executive's priorities? And how can I continue to optimize that so that she or he feels the ongoing refinement of my role, supporting them in their ongoing refinement of their role? So in tandem with all of this, I think we see executives' priorities shifting in a more seismic way in the last 7 months than we've seen in the past. And so a lot of adaptability within organizations and leadership teams, and looking to assistants to say, are you here and willing to adapt with us? Are you coming with solutions? Are you leaning into recalibrating your role? And are you articulating that value that you bring? And so one example, because you're right, we have a lot of assistants who are part-time. Some of them support a couple of clients in very different organizations and businesses. And the approach of, siloing each one and looking at what are the key priorities here, and am I working in alignment with that? And asking and stepping back, which we can talk about, but really asking those key questions to calibrate the role. I think one thing, just to give you an example of articulating value that I've seen recently, is an EA who was working on a key process and found ways to optimize, and I would say future-proof, to your point, future-proof her role by saying, I've integrated technology. I've integrated some apps that can help automate part of our process, that can help bring the team together in better ways, and went on to articulate the value that that brought to the organization. So looking at what that process looked like before, we had a 45-day process and it's gone down to 29 days. That translates to revenue for the organization. We had fewer drop balls or fewer lag times because ownership was clear via this process and tool. And so being able to showcase that value and say, I'm also saving time and saving cost because I've implemented this, those things go so far in, I think, future-proofing your role and also continuing to show that value. One thing with assistants that can often happen is you function so smoothly behind the scenes. Sometimes people forget how hard you're working to make things go smoothly. And so finding ways in your own style to share those reminders and articulate that value will go a long way.
I love that so much. I'd love for you to expand a little bit on the point that you made about really aligning with the focus of the organization, and how do you juggle that if you're supporting multiple executives. And I think 33 Vincent assistants are just so magnificent because, to your point, many of them are supporting executives from different organizations. So the juggling of all of that while still really wanting your executive, each of your executives, to feel really seen and valued. How do you coach them through that?
Yeah, I think having multiple executives can be challenging in general. Having multiple executives within one organization affords you the ability to have that deep organizational context. And then in the other light, having different executives from different organizations brings a level of nuance and challenge that requires, I think, a bit more focus and coaching. But ultimately, my best practice and how we always coach is around setting up, well, obviously regular feedback is important, but setting up definitely a quarterly cadence for recalibration, understanding, especially during COVID, how priorities are shifting for the organization, keeping an ear to the ground on organizational updates. A lot of our assistants love following all of the sent mail that goes out of a folder because you can see so much context to changing priorities and initiatives. But keeping an ear to the ground on that, and then coming to the table to ask those key questions. How are your priorities shifting? What are your goals for this quarter? How can I best support you in achieving your goals? So it's a mix of thoughtful questioning and being proactive in that approach, and also being really keen, like a sponge, to anything that's changing within the organization. And I think that especially assistants have such a unique vantage point, unique access. So of course, confidentiality is important and sensitivity with that information is important, but you have access to a lot of what's going on. And so if you can bring that into your work and bring that into the solutions and the questions that you ask, it'll go a long way to set yourself up for success with your executive. So a lot of our clients right now have been shifting pretty dramatically, and with their EAs working in concert, they're able to, in many cases, reframe what the EA is working on as top priorities and future-proof the role in that way as well. And so again, I think now that we're in Q4, it's a great time to set up a quarterly step back, whether or not you have a formal performance evaluation or a formal metric in place to check in. Set one up and set up a longer check-in to ask those questions. And don't just wait to be given feedback, but really ask for what's working, what's not working, what are your goals? How can I better support those? And I think those questions will set you up really well.
I love that, and come armed with ideas. I know you've heard this sentiment certainly through onboarding executives, and I've heard it a number of times as well, where it's not always apparent as an executive how to best work with an assistant. And I think a lot of executives feel the same fear that many assistants feel of, like, am I doing this right? I really want this to work well. And I think that the assistant industry is putting out a lot of great content and resources to better support our assistants through the evolution of their role and through deeply supporting their executives. But I'm not seeing a ton of content yet on the executive side, which I know is something that both of our organizations are working on. How can we help them better support their assistants? Because I think that two-way street is so important. If one of those power pairs, they get it. They get how important that particular partnership is for the success of not only their roles, but for the organization that they're a part of as well. And I know that 33 Vincent plays a really, really valuable role that's not often talked about in the matching of these pairs, which is really a gatekeeper for the assistant. How can you make sure that every executive coming in to work with a 33V assistant gets it? So could you talk a little bit about kind of what you're looking for with the executives that you bring into 33 Vincent, and I guess what you're not looking forward to would be good to share.
Yeah, we've spent some time refining this. And like I said earlier, we meet so many different executives from different industries, different size companies, different team compositions. And what we look for on the whole is the mindset. And it's a mindset around readiness or curiosity, even, I would say, around leveraging a partner. Not I want an assistant who can just take all my tasks and run all my errands, but someone who can come in and be a thought partner, can be elevated to a level that sees the forest and is able to make strategic moves with their time to align with their priorities. And so we are looking for that mindset first and foremost, someone who just understands that an assistant is a valued member of their team. And when I say curiosity, I don't know that everyone has experienced that, but they have the mindset around, that's what I want and that's what's possible. And in many cases, those folks have had an assistant before that didn't work out or wasn't leaning into the proactivity the way that they needed to. And so now they're really ready for that partner. And so what we're not looking for is someone who looks down upon the role or thinks of it as an errand kind of role or a task taker kind of role, because I think the role can be so much more than that. And we're really looking to attract clients who want that top tier of support.
Can you offer any advice for anybody who may be watching this session of, say they're working with an executive or potentially multiple executives who do not understand the value of this role? We've talked a lot about proactivity and things like that already in this conversation, but any tips for how they can maybe turn it around, where maybe they're resetting expectations with their executive to really showcase the value and the potential of this partnership?
Yeah, this is a good, and I don't want to say tricky one. It's nuanced because every relationship is a little bit different.
There's definitely no one size fits all solution.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for assistants to develop the confidence to manage up and to showcase their value. That takes confidence, and it takes trust in a relationship and a bit of gumption to stand up and say, here's my value. And I think we're under tapping it in these ways. But that said, there are likely many ways that many of us are not yet tapping into the areas that we're really good at in our roles. And so what is that for each of you? And how can you see that through the lens of your client's needs or your executive's needs? Because we love to coach executives on, after the first 90 days, what does that look like from there? Usually you get into a good groove, and a lot of executives say, I don't know what else to hand over, or I need some ideas around how I can better leverage my assistant. And I think that better leverage creates a tighter relationship. So we often coach through that process. But if it's you as the assistant, look at your own skill set. What are you really good at that you haven't yet been able to maximize in your role? And think of ways that could fit the needs of the team, the executive, the organization, and come with a proposal. Ideas around some things, opportunities that you've seen. I see that you're handling X, Y, and Z. I can take that for you, and here's a proposal on how I could do that. And finding and mining out those opportunities, I think it's just that continued approach of advocating for yourself, of advocating for the relationship, And time again, we see the trust, the value, the relationship develops when that happens. It develops really organically. So I would challenge anyone who's feeling either underutilized or has skills that they could put in to start to develop a proposal around those.
I think that's such great advice. And I know you and I have spent a lot of time thinking about surprise and delight. There
Yes.
are often in any situation some low-hanging fruit of ways where you tweak it a little bit. You know, maybe you just do something proactively without being asked by your executive. You handled something, you caught a potential issue before it reached your executive's plate, whatever it might be. But we continue to think a lot about that at Base as well, of how can we make it as easy as possible for the assistant to surprise and delight their executive, because our whole goal is to help the assistant to shine. We want them to be seen as this really valuable thought partner, second brain, someone who's looking around the corner. But as we know, assistants have so many things that they have to juggle constantly. And so trying to build a software that can handle as much of those things so that they can free up their brain is what we're doing. But we also find there's that added layer of like, how do you fill the time that has been freed up by enhanced technology or by streamlining your processes, whatever it might be. Shifting topics a little bit, I think something that 33 Vincent has done really, really well is integrate within the organizations that your assistants have been placed. Sometimes there are chiefs of staff there, sometimes there are internal full-time assistants as well. I think we're going to see more and more of that as our roles continue to change, as organizations continue to change, and as we begin to see simply more outsourcing. We're going to see a myriad of in-house and outsource things. So I imagine that some of our audience, they are those in-house assistants that are maybe seeing some outsourced support come through, or maybe on the flip side, maybe they are remote and they're trying to best work with people that are in-house. Can you give any tips of how that's worked really well?
Yeah, we've had every different slice of that, and I'm trying to think of some universal takeaways. You know, I look to the way that the assistant can collaborate with so many members of the team and of leadership to, I think, facilitate better communication and decision making. And an example you gave is around chief of staff. So we've worked with remote chiefs of staff for an organization. So the executive assistant is partnered with that chief of staff. Both are remote to the client. We've also worked with in-house chiefs of staff and have found that is such a wonderful relationship. If you're able to partner with the chief of staff, you get that added context for the leader and also a great partner to help drive initiatives forward. And I think sometimes a really responsive partner, if the executive is out, someone that you can keep the ball moving a little bit faster. And so the chief of staff role is one that we love collaborating with. Often we'll report into the chief of staff. And what stands out to me in terms of communication is onboarding with both the executive and the chief of staff, and that elevated leadership role. And I should actually back up a second. We often support an EA who supports an executive. So it's almost like an assistant to the EA that just amplifies that EA's capabilities and capacity. And with both of those relationships, I think there's a unique approach to both seeing the greater executive need and also considering that key stakeholder. Whether they're remote or not, I think managing up to that party and also syncing up with what are your priorities as we look at the office of the CEO or the office of the executive, and how can I best support not just her or him, but also you in accomplishing these goals. And so it creates, I think, this beautiful stakeholder relationship where you have a team approach to managing. And then in terms of in-house versus remote, I think it can be a challenge when you have a full team in-house and just a remote assistant. That's a little bit more of, I think, thoughtful planning and communication, because they might have context in the office that you're not getting in your remote setting. So asking really thoughtful questions, using BASE's decision stream is a great way to do that. As questions arise, triaging them and sending them in some cases to the EA or to the chief of staff, and then getting as many answered as possible and maybe pushing the rest through to the executive. So finding ways to optimize communication is going to be key. But as I mentioned, remote work is changing, and I think many can attest to the fact that flexible roles are on the rise, and the importance of communication is going to be paramount for all.
Yeah, so you didn't even know it, but you transitioned to something, a point that I wanted to add on to what you're saying is that I think as we continue to see more and more blending amongst teams, deciding as an organization, what are, and I brought this up earlier, but what are those pathways for information? Do we want our entire executive team receiving the same type of communication from their direct reports, from their assistants? How are we as an organization holding each other accountable to our goals and objectives, whether those are OKRs or OMMs or MITs or whatever they might be? But what does that information hierarchy look like? Because I think often, especially when we start talking about larger organizations, you've already got the hierarchy of assistants there, but they're not often tied to that shared common language that the organization is using to achieve its goals. And I've seen through the lens of BASE anyway, that being a really powerful way to unite these blended teams is by agreeing like, hey, let's use the shared language, whatever that might be, on this set cadence with this specific process. And of course, we love it if you can use BASE to do that, but that is what can kind of gel people together. So
Absolutely.
I've got a final question for you, and then we'll wrap up with telling everybody if they want to learn more about 33 Vincent, where they can find you. But before we get to that, I'd love any final tips, tricks, recommendations for those of our listeners who are really looking to future-proof their role and upskill themselves. What should they be focusing on, skills to hone, or maybe skills that they want to go a little bit deeper with?
Yeah, I think for anyone, leaning into technology and ways to better leverage technology in the new year, especially, let's look ahead to what the world will shift to in the new year, and what lasting trends we might see, what changes we might experience to our roles and the market in general. Technology is going to be a key piece of that. And if there is a space in your role where you can leverage a project management tool or collaboration software, something like BASE to help your workflow and your organization and your communication with your executive, take the time to understand what would be the highest impact for you in your role and explore those tools. I love to say, if you can, set aside a little time between now and end of year, whether it's a weekly allotment or a couple hours a month, to really dive into what are some opportunities to leverage technology in new ways. One thing that just was circulating in our team was Zapier. How can I better leverage Zapier and automate some key tasks to help everybody stay more focused? And so whatever that looks like for you, I think technology is the ticket. And in helping optimize your role, as costs are ever a consideration among businesses, ways that you can leverage technology to save costs or increase revenue, help drive that executive's performance and impact is going to be the golden ticket. So we love using BASE, highly recommend if you haven't tried it. Paige, you didn't ask me to say this, but I would highly recommend exploring the opportunities there and ways that you can creatively leverage the tool to meet your unique relationship needs with your leader. So if you have time between now and end of year, lean into tech.
Yes, I obviously could not agree more with that sentiment. And I think using technology to really align yourself with your executive's goals, so you can not only say, hey, I'm going to save us XYZ time or dollars, but also here's directly how I contributed to these things myself, to these larger organizational goals. Because once your executive really starts seeing you as an integral part of her or his own goals, that person's going to go to bat if we do have to face another round of layoffs, or if there's going to be any sort of change. I think when there's that really solid pairing, Most executives would rather lose their CFO or some other executive than their assistant, because that's such an integral role when done well.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're
agreed.
running out of time here, but can you tell everybody where they can learn more about 33 Vincent if they're interested in either becoming a client or coming to work with you all?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our website is pretty simple, 33Vincent, VINCENT.com, and 33, just the numbers. We have information there about our core services. We have information about freelancing with 33 Vincent and opportunities to stay updated on our progress, our hiring, our opportunities. And so definitely recommend checking us out there. And then on LinkedIn, I believe it's spelled out 33 Vincent. Check us out there as well.
Awesome. Well, Casey did not ask me to say this, but 33 Vincent itself is a wonderful organization, but something really, really unique about it is the tremendously warm and inviting culture that Casey in particular has built there. So if you're looking for remote freelance work, couldn't recommend 33 Vincent any higher. It's a really wonderful, wonderful, wonderful place. So
Thanks, Paige.
thank you so much, Casey, for joining us. This was such a treat. Unfortunately, we only get to talk these days when we're having business calls, but I'll take any opportunity I can to connect with you. Thank you so much, and can't wait to hear the feedback from this session.
Yeah, thank you, Paige, and thank you all.